Hello, back again. Wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about the stuff I was saying on my first video cast. You might hear my kids in the background. I'm doing this during the day, as opposed to the other one. I actually did it when they were asleep. Had a chance to sit down and watch my own video, of course, and realized that I hadn't gone very well in depth with a few things. I didn't want to on the first one. One of the first things that my wife and my family have discussed is if there's a need to go anywhere. Well, with us, there's not. We needed to see what we had in the local area that we could survive off of, if needs be. Luckily for us, there's actually quite a few books out there that are good, and with me being in the military for as long as I was, there's certain things that I have the advantage over some people. Not everybody, but some people. The first couple of things I want to talk about is a few books that we have picked up and that we find relatively useful. One is The Forager's Harvest, A Guide to Identifying, Harvesting, and Preparing Edible Wild Plants. It's written by Samuel Thayer. Really interesting, really good book. See if I can't get a better zoom in on it. There we go. And the spelling of the name. Samuel Thayer. It's something that my wife actually got into several years ago, was trying to identify local plants and herbs just for basically a hobby. And it's been real interesting so far. There's two more books that I personally myself have found rather interesting, and if you're the first time survivalist, should I say, first time ever going out into the wilderness, looking for things, trying to build your own house, learning how to tan, gut, skin, and prepare deer hides, with also a lot of other useful need-to-know type things. Naked into the Wilderness, the whole series so far has been totally awesome. I actually got this book a couple weeks ago. It was recommended to me by a buddy of mine, and I finished it in less than 2 days. It's Naked into the Wilderness, Primitive Wilderness, and Living and Survival Skills by John and Gary McPherson. They have several books out at the current moment. And there is the picture of that one. To include their second one, which is Naked into the Wilderness 2, Primitive Wilderness Skills Applied in Advance by John and Gary McPherson. It's basically a yellow cover, same size book, and it goes into a little bit more in depth into the survival skills. A couple of things that my wife and I have actually talked about that we would pretty much need the first couple of months. Of course, everybody talks about heirloom seeds. Not everybody knows what heirloom seeds are. Heirloom seeds are actual seeds that, once grown and you reap the benefits or the fruits of the labor, you can actually take the seeds out of those and replant those next year. Not the genetic stuff that we've got that only lasts one growth season and then just you can't do anything with it. Heirloom seeds continue growing through the fruits, through the seeds, not year round, but over and over and over again each year, as long as you plant them and take care of them, of course. Herbs are always a good thing to have. Most food is kind of bland, especially nowadays. If you're used to eating steak and garlic, guess what? You're going to need the garlic. Not food-wise, but taste-wise. Salt today in today's society is a commodity. Everybody's got salt in their house. but you never realize how much you're actually going to use when you don't have it. Salt is good for cleaning, good for canning, good for preserving food. You can do a lot of things with salt. You got ice outside and you want to get rid of it, guess what? Salt will help with that. Cloth. Whether it's heavy cotton cloth like canvas or denim to something as simple as really light, what would they call that? T-shirt material. Always good to have some of that laying around. You're always going to need clothing. You may not be able to get it right away, but if you pick up a needle and thread, basic clothing is easy to make. It may not look pretty, it may not always hold up, but it's something. If anything, you can use it to patch the clothing you've got. Thread. I personally have a stock of nylon thread that I use in my sewing machine, which is a boot patch. Very old Treadle 29K2 that I use for leather crafting. Very good thread, stands up to a lot. You can buy it at Walmart, relatively inexpensive. Look around your local area and see who has meat that's readily available. Luckily with us, we have cows in the neighborhood, we have chickens, we have goats, we have things that are available and are a good trade item for someone else for a skill that you can provide. Vitamins, for the first couple of months, you're not going to have the greenery if it's during the winter. Of course, everything dies during the winter. You're going to want vitamins and supplements, especially for you and your kids. Dietary or just regular multivitamins for adult versus child. Always good to have on hand. Invest in some kind of wood stove. They may be $100, $150, $200, but you know what? You never know when you're going to need it. Regardless of whether you have power or not, eventually something's going to happen and power is going to go out. If you're staying home, you got to have some way to cook and heat your house. That'll do both. Medicinal supplies. Nowadays, most everybody relies on medicine for one thing or another. If you don't have medicinal supplies on hand, at least for the first 3 months, you're pretty much, well, we'll say screwed. That's where, with my wife and I, the herbal books come in handy. We also have, she also has Encyclopedia of Herbs, which is a really rather hefty book that was given to us by a friend of ours. And it gives you the Latin terms, names, definitions, and soil types, cultivation, things like that, that you'll need in order to take care of the herb. Personal hygiene products, especially for females, you can get by with doing it the medieval way, which was basically rolling up some cloth and putting it where the sun don't shine, but it's not very sanitary. Do what you got to do to take care of that. Going back on books. Books are a way to pass down knowledge from someone else or some other era or someone else's ideas and knowledge to you, to your children. Whether it's a storybook or an educational book, you're always going to need the basic skills in life. Reading, math, science, so on and so forth. It's good to have at least a basic textbook with those or of those laying around. With the books and stories, the storybooks, that's the way that our ancestors actually passed down their knowledge from generation to generation. The knowledge of their families, the knowledge of, hey, my Uncle Joe did this one day and this is where it got him. They were usually stories with morals. Go back into your history. Look at mythology. any kind of mythology, to include the Bible. Christianity has a lot of stories in the Bible about moral subjects. Check it out. Games. Games are always good, especially on cold winter days, where most of the time you're going to be spent around the fire or fireplace or stove or wherever, just to stay warm. It's always good to have something to occupy your kids while you and your wife, or you or your wife, are trying to take care of things around the house, which goes along with paper and art supplies. Paper's easy to make, but if you don't have the means to make it, you may as well stock up on it. Candles, anybody can get one of these cheap $10, $15, $20 candle making kits. They're okay, but you can always just stock up on regular candles also. You're going to need light in other rooms if you're without power and it's at night. At some point in time, there's going to be storms or gray cloud skies, whatever. You're going to need light. My recommendation, candles or oil lamps. The only difference is with oil lamps, you can actually use the oil for other things besides just lighting a fire. Strike anywhere matches, surprisingly enough, I don't know if they've made some kind of local law or regulation. It's kind of hard to find those. But sometimes your local dollar store should carry them. Just pick up a box or two, heck, 4. You'd be surprised what you find on eBay. Strike anywhere matches? My God. Anyway. Aluminum foil. When you've got the ability to get it, get the heavy aluminum foil. It comes in rather large sheets. You can use it several times and for several different things. Going back to the wood stove. If you have a wood burning stove, most of the time you're cooking on the top of it. But if you want to use it as an oven, you can take food, meats, potatoes, vegetables, and actually wrap it up in the aluminum foil and just stick it directly in the fire and cook it that way. Without the aluminum foil, of course, you can't. Filtration system. There's lots of different filtration systems out, and you can actually find ways to build them on YouTube here. But you're gonna need one, some shape, form, or fashion. And if you're staying at home and expecting company, you're gonna need a large one. Check into it, figure out what works for you, and where you would need to place it. That would go along with your water collection. Whether you've got gutters or downspouts in your house, or whether you're using some rigged up way of collecting water, you're still going to need some way to filter it. And putting iodine tablets in a 55-gallon drum gets kind of expensive quick. Shoes and blankets. The good thing about shoes nowadays is that they're relatively inexpensive and you can stock up on them. The bad part about shoes nowadays is that not very many of them last. You're looking at spending $10, $20 on a pair of shoes. Spend a little bit more and invest in a pair of good boots, good work boots. The waterproof, oil resistant, so on and so forth. You can find them at most any Walmart, but kind of be careful with those. You want to get something that's comfortable, something that's made out of leather preferably, something that's going to last. Blankets. It gets cold. Regardless of where you're at, it's going to get cold. You're used to, even in Texas, being out in 110 degree weather. When it gets down to 60, guess what? You're cold. You're going to need blankets. Especially if your heat system is in a central kitchen area and your rooms are separate. Your rooms are going to get colder. Find something. It doesn't have to be a thermal blanket or whatever. Just get a couple of wool blankets. A couple of these cheap mink blankets would work just as well. There's a lot of things that a lot of people can do. They just don't realize it. Put yourself in a situation where you don't have something and try to figure out a way around it. Use your imagination. On that, See you later.